Good evening, everyone. My name is Gail Otherson, and I'd like to teach you a little bit about the British East India Company and how they took over an entire subcontinent. Um, the British East India Company was given a charter by Queen Elizabeth I on December 31st, 1600. This gave them exclusive rights to all trade between the East Indies and Britain. It seemed to be quite a monopoly. However, there was the Dutch East India Company, and the French also had a trading company that went to the East Indies. Both of these companies were quite hostile to the British and were very hostile in them using their trade routes. So in 1615, Sir Thomas Roe, who was an ambassador from the king, was given permission to establish trading posts inland and as well as along the coast. The first one was at the port of Surat, which we know today as Madar. They established what they called factories there, which were places for them to store the goods until they could be transported either to the coast and put onto a ship, or if they were already on the coast, they were just waiting for a ship to take them to England. The British East India Company took these areas and they established them as port centers, which became their presidencies. And this particular one was linked to London until the late 1800s. Bombay was the second port center which was established. It was under Portuguese control until 1661, when it was given to the King of England as a dowry for his bride. And in 1668, he turned over control to the British East India Trading Company. It eventually became a strength of the trade industry. They fortified walls. They had British and Indian soldiers who guarded the area and protected the trade routes. They also established a shipbuilding center there, and Calcutta was the third urban city that was formed by them. It was an important one because the Hooghly River that would allow them to access the seas. So that was the third presidency. Here you'll see how the British pushed through and eventually took over almost the entire subcontinent. One of the problems that they had with trade was that the Indian people did not want the wool that the British were quite used to trading, so they had to find something that was of value to them. The only thing they found of value to them really was gold and silver bullion. So they were coined and used to purchase things like spices, especially chili, raw silk, indigo, which was used as a dye, or saltpeter that was used for munitions, and Indian fabrics like chintz and calico, which became very popular among the wealthy in England. The way that the British East India Company would make their profits was by re-exporting these goods after they had already been taken to England. They'd take them to places like the Americas. By 1750 to 1798, the British East India Trading Company became more involved in politics and the governing of India. They began to establish armies and employed Indians who were much less expensive than the European soldiers. The British government also sent regiments of officers from the English army to support them. And there were several conflicts with the French, which eventually drove the French out of India during the 7 Years' War. There were two major pivotal battles that occurred: the Battle of Plassey in 1757 and the Battle of Buxar in 1764. The British, the Nawab of the Mughal dynasty, empire, felt that the British East India Trading Company was a threat to India because the trading company had been taking advantage of the tax exemptions and other trade benefits that had been granted to them by previous governors. And so in 1756, his armies captured Calcutta and took many British prisoners. several of those prisoners died while being held captive. So the British saw him as a threat to his own people and to the Europeans in India. So the company decided that they needed to replace him and put in their candidate. This became quite a popular way of getting control of a territory. If the ruler was not, if the governor was not somebody that cooperated with them, then they would take him out of power and put somebody else in, oftentimes by force. General Cornwallis, or Lord Cornwallis, was named the Governor General and Commander in Chief in 1786. He implemented many changes in taxation, land ownership, and establishment of a justice system. The law recognized what they called zamindars as landowners, and they rented out their land to farmers. General Cornwallis established a fixed tax rate, which seemed pretty good to the landowners. However, the people were left without any protection, and so the landowners would raise their rates at their will, and so the people were left without any protection. It was widely accepted that there was widespread corruption among the Indian people who had held high offices, so they passed laws to disallow any Indians from holding any high position or becoming an officer in the military. The new ruling class consisted of about 2,000 civil service employees, 50,000 British officers, all for a population of about 200 million people. By 1800, the English laws and the English court system were established in India, and the only laws that did not change to British laws were those related to personal laws, such as marriage, inheritance, or adoption. Those laws remained and still are governed by religious law today. The British territories really began to expand in 1798. The British East India Company had 3 well-established presidencies, control of Indian land and tax revenues. Lord Wellesley, who was the general governor from 1798 to 1803, conquered the territories quickly and easily, rationalizing that the rulers were tyrants or that it was necessary to bring more revenue. And by 1848, virtually the entire subcontinent of India was under British rule of one form or another. On the 10th of May, 1857, it was rumored that the British had been putting pig and cow grease on bullets. And when the people found out, they were upset because they felt that the British were trying to make them abandon their own religions of Hinduism and Muslims and convert to Christianity. So they murdered all of their officers and marched 30 miles to Delhi, where they made the Mughal emperor their leader. And things just got worse from there. Many conflicts occurred, and in 1858, the House of Commons in London blamed the British East India Company for all of the uprising, and they withdrew their charter. And so from that point on, the British government themselves took over India. They made lots of changes, some good, some not so good, and that is how one company was able to take over control of an entire subcontinent. I hope you learned something tonight.